13 years ago, James Cameron unleashed his magnum opus onto the world, a revolution of filmmaking technology that pushed filmmaking itself as a medium to its absolute limit in 2009. Avatar became an absolute sensation, the highest-grossing movie ever, 9 Oscar nominations and 3 wins. But more than that, it pushed the envelope so much so as to serve as the same kind of demarcation point for cinema that Cameron's own Titanic was just over a decade beforehand, a moment where, in so many ways, things were no longer the same because this movie existed. It is undeniable that much of the cinema of the 2010s, from a technical perspective, owes a great deal to Avatar. I mean, shit, dude, the visuals in Avatar still hold up. They still compete with the biggest blockbusters coming out today, and it's over 10 years old. And now, with the first of the sequels, The Way of Water, finally upon us, and with the original film back in cinemas and killing it at the box office, like, damn, y'all really missed Avatar on the big screen, and I am all for it. If anything else, it feels like the impact of Avatar is stronger than ever before. But when you set aside its importance, the technological leap forward it represents, when you look at it 13 years removed from the atomic bomb level explosion of hype that surrounded it in 2009, when simply watching Avatar today, does it hold up? Is the highest grossing movie of all time more than just the highest grossing movie of all time? Is it still as magical, as transformative to go to Pandora now? Or is Avatar's power diluted by time, and does it stand as more of an impressive technical benchmark than a magnificent film in its own right? Well, we're gonna find out.
Let's dance.
But before we head into the Forest of Pandora, let's link with an awesome box of gear from Bespoke Post. Bespoke Post is a monthly membership club delivering a box of awesome, top-shelf goods from under-the-radar brands. It's free to join, and you can skip a month or cancel anytime. Bespoke Post purchases 90% of their products from smaller brands, many of which are based right here in the United States.
You are not in Kansas anymore.
Including Forge, a Damascus steel knife made by Buck and Bear Knives located in Pennsylvania. Every month, they introduce their members to cool new products, outdoor gear, barware, clothing, and more based on a quiz to learn your preferences. It's free to join, and you can skip a month or cancel anytime and preview your box before it's shipped. You'll get a box of awesome assigned to you. Every box of awesome has around $70 worth of goods inside, but costs you only a fraction of the value. And before it's shipped, you'll get a preview of what comes inside to decide if you'd like to keep it, swap it for a different box, or skip the month entirely for no charge. You only pay for what you want. Take 2 of my favorites, for instance. There's Flame, a miniature indoor fireplace which is perfect for the wintertime, the Christmas season, by Flickr, that runs on clean burning rubber alcohol and can be used as a warm center for your room, or can even be used to cook small meals or treats. You know, we all love s'mores. You gotta get a taste of the outdoors inside sometime, why not? And there's Cask, a miniature barrel and bottling kit that lets you prepare your own spirit of preference, which is great for a big bourbon and whiskey guy like myself. Check out my boxes and so many more, and to get 20% off your first box of awesome, click the link in the description and enter FilmSpeak20 at checkout, or go to bespokepost.com/FilmSpeak20. That's bespokepost.com/FilmSpeak20, and thank you so much to Bespoke Post for sponsoring this video. While James Cameron was in the midst of production on Avatar, the US had already spent the better part of the aughts stuck in a military quagmire in Asia, one which was growing measurably in unpopularity by the day. Our time in the Middle East was like Vietnam all over again, a frustrating exercise in colonialism. 2 wars fought over natural resources that was disguised as being some kind of noble endeavor. And that's where the story of Avatar, and therefore its commentary, its deeper messaging that Cameron was getting at, is derived from. A war being fought over unobtainium, masquerading as humanity, venturing out to further our scientific pursuits. Cameron invokes imagery of unpopular, morally wrong military campaigns, such as Iraq and Vietnam, and pairs it with that of traditional colonialist iconography to hammer home its cyclical nature. These campaigns, the invasion of Pandora, are just colonialism wearing a new coat of paint. Their mission centered around resources, greed, and military superiority, dominance. It was all in an effort to support capitalist interests. In the world of Avatar, Cameron creates uniforms, helmets, weapons, choppers, warships that aren't too distant from the prominent iconography of these conflicts to subconsciously envelop you in the feeling of those wars, so you as an audience member are already primed and ready to receive his message as it pertains to the central conflict of the film. Cameron's not mincing words here. The movie's not trying to be subtle about the fact that the entire reason the RDA are on Pandora is for money and resources. Selfridge explicitly says that they're only there because the veins of unobtainium on the planet are worth, well, a lot more than their weight in gold, that's for sure. And if you think Cameron's approach here is too much of a sledgehammer, well, I mean, goddamn, the villain's name is fucking Selfridge, and unobtainium is the mineral that they're after. Look, Cameron knew what he was doing, right? Like, it's very blunt. It's in your face. It's cartoonishly absurd, and yet it works. I love it in the context of this film.
Look at all that cheddar.
Let's be real, this is not something that James Cameron has ever shied away from, whether he's in a futuristic post-apocalypse like in Terminator or more than a century back in time in Titanic. He's always using the time and place of his films to hold a magnifying glass up to the world we're living in at the time. I think the difference here is that there's no pretense. He's being unashamedly and honestly rightly on the nose with it because it's what many people needed to hear at the time, and you can just feel his frustration, his desire to shake people and wake them up and say, look, no more mincing words, this is the fucked up shit that's going on and we're gonna address it because I'm upset about it, I'm sick of it, things need to change. Also, because of how effective Cameron's commentary is overall, I really gel with Jake's character. I've never disliked him or Sam Worthington's performance. I actually think Sam Worthington gets a bit of a bad rap, but I think in the wake of the fall of Kabul in particular, the ignoble end to the other major conflict the US has been involved in during the century, the hammering home of how pointless it ended up being and how so many men and women were sacrificed for nothing, his tale of being a Marine, paralyzed in combat and all but abandoned to himself afterwards, strikes an even stronger chord now. He's only deemed useful after his twin brother is killed. He's only allotted any kind of accommodation in life at all because the military needs his genome. They literally need Jake's body once again after they had already destroyed it before. Now, the idea that the private sector would employ the US military to invade an entire planet to mine its resources is obviously a pretty strong statement against the larger systemic capitalist issues we face, but the fact that they just use Jake as a pawn after they've reduced him to being a deadbeat is a vicious look at it on a micro level. Obviously, he'll say yes for the money, and because of his brother's death, he feels like he owes him something. And even the change of scenery, because the VA has screwed him to no end and going to Pandora is his only respite. The military instilled in him a can-do attitude, a sense of perseverance, yet the institution simultaneously ostracizes him because he's disabled and is constantly doing things on his own to show his worth because of the chip he has on his shoulder. Of course, no one really looks at him as if he's doing something worthwhile. Instead, they say, oh, this idiot is just refusing help.
You okay? You alright?
Yeah, I'm okay.
It's oddly enough Quaritch, of all people, who actually shows Jake any respect for his gumption, and while that might just be part of his ruse in order to get Jake to work with him, there's nothing in the movie that suggests he was necessarily insincere in that particular way. Everyone else really casts him aside. Quaritch, on the other hand, not only seeks Jake's potential, but taps into it. And that's not to say he isn't using Jake, he obviously is, he just sees Jake as a means to an end and taps into a side of him that he can kind of empathize with because of the scarring and the trauma that he has also experienced. And he has no qualms about throwing Jake into the lion's den if it can help him achieve his goals on Pandora. But he doesn't see him as just a paraplegic or a brainless Marine like so many of the other humans do. He sees a Marine with more initiative and gumption than arguably any other Marine on Pandora, and respects it, even though that respect is the same reason he's selfishly using him. He's exploiting a part of him that Quaritch feels that he understands. As a result, cast aside so widely by humanity, you get the sense that Jake being in the Avatar not only gives him his legs back, not only gives him a sense of identity and community, but makes him feel like he's finally being acknowledged for his initiative and work ethic as well. The Na'vi see him as a person. He's given purpose and can use that sense of community and self-discovery to inspire others. It's so fascinating that the whole idea of the Omaticaya giving Jake a shot at becoming one of their people, even though they've gotten burnt so many times, is in a way allowed to happen because he's a Marine. They see his potential as well and are also somewhat exploitative of it, though not in a malicious way like with Quaritch. In Jake, they see an opportunity for the message to get through to the people actually perpetuating the problems, in a way to ensure that they remain prosperous in their home despite the colonizers who are tearing so much of it apart. I think that's also why calling Avatar a white savior movie or comparing it to Pocahontas or Dances with Wolves is a bit of an oversimplification. Jake isn't a white savior. He's what happens when you educate people on the problems they're directly responsible for causing. Hell, the only reason he connected with Taruk was because he needed to do something dramatic to win back their trust. He's not better than the Na'vi at taming Pandora's wildlife. He took a wild gamble that fortunately paid off. And he doesn't take a leadership role out of vanity or arrogance or a belief that he's more capable of leading the Na'vi to victory than, say, Tsute. He does it because he's been on the other team. He knows the humans' weaknesses, the intricacies of their technology. He can direct the Na'vi in a way they wouldn't have done before because they simply don't know the full import of what they're up against. And even after they learn that truth during the destruction of Home Tree, they don't have a pocket ace they can use in order to gain an edge against superior weaponry and technology. The more I sit with Avatar and the more I think about the white savior criticism that's been directed towards this film, the more I just don't necessarily like it. I kind of detest it to an extent because it's all about opening your heart to a whole other way of life. Jake literally inhabits the body of another person who is indigenous and is gifted a new pair of eyes to experience the world. Then he had to open his eyes up to Neytiri in the way she sees the world, the way her people see the world, and then he chose to make the dream a reality and reality the dream. I also think the filmmaking reflects this. The second Jake inhabits his avatar body and starts running around, he begins experiencing life differently. His senses overwhelming and exciting him, but he also still has that military instinct instilled in him, which is why when he's running off from the jaguar or fighting off the hyenas, it's depicted as scary or horrifying, versus when Neytiri begins to train him, the fear of the unknown dissipates, and he sees things as they are, a beautiful ecosystem that's really only perverted out of fear, which is exactly what drives the enemy. The broad caricature Avatar paints the corporate colonizers as drives this idea home further. As we've already addressed, Avatar is definitely a strong anti-colonialist statement, but I think it's an anti-colonialist statement told from the perspective of the colonizers. One of those colonizers, inhabiting an avatar of the body of one of the oppressed, sees the harm his own people are doing. As a result of Cameron telling the story this way, he's not assuming the perspective of the indigenous, he's instead using the perspective of the very people who are causing destruction to these lands and communities to try and enlighten them. I feel it works to the film's benefit. Jake is kind of simple, he's like a baby, as Neytiri says, but that also makes him more impressionable, more willing to change, which is vital for a compelling protagonist. We see his mind become open to another way of life. It's an attempt at having an introspective discussion on colonialism and white supremacy told from the perspective of those perpetrating those ideologies, rather than attempting to speak on the issue from the perspective of those being victimized. The film still invokes indigenous voices and shows how these systems primarily harm those communities, but the primary focus is on a perpetrator coming to realize what they're a part of and choosing to stop it. It teeters on the mystical native trope a bit with Neytiri, but because it's more about Jake realizing his wrongs by contrasting that with a more harmonious way of life, I feel like it avoids falling right into it. But it's not like Neytiri is doing anything mystical. She's literally just showing him the world as it is, and the innate beauty of it is what opens Jake's eyes, not necessarily her specifically. I mean, yes, he falls for her, but it's because he falls for nature first, and that allows him to see her as a person and connect with her on that level. White people do need to talk about racism and tell stories about racism, but they shouldn't do so by telling other people's stories, as is so often the case. The best kinds of white-centric stories on racism have to do with white people accepting their own role in the problem, and not just reckoning with it, but criticizing, listening, and working towards a solution. It isn't groundbreaking, but writing it off as another Pocahontas or Dances with Wolves isn't really fair or even accurate in my opinion. Those films fall into the trap of being problematic because they place such an emphasis on trying to portray the indigenous experience, and in the case of Pocahontas, it's told from her perspective. But with Avatar, Cameron doesn't assume to know that experience, but he does know the damage his people have caused and explores that while also showing things as they are, as a means to wake us from apathy. So while it follows similar beats to white savior stories, it threads the needle much better. This is aided by the fact that he's also telling a story about a fictional species rather than grifting stories about real confederacies, real communities, real people. He's not speaking for anyone. And speaking of speaking for people, Jake doesn't even try to take power away from Sute when all is said and done. He actively asks to take the floor, and not once tries to usurp leadership from Sute. Had Sute survived the final battle, I believe Jake would have stepped back to allow the Na'vi to be led by their rightful clan leader. And this also ties into the film's larger wish for global community, across and transcending nationalities, genders, race. I see you. The whole point is to see the person sitting across from you as they are, regardless of how they look, regardless of their physical state, regardless of what is perceived to stand in the way of peace between two beings. And while you could read Sully inhabiting a Na'vi body in bad faith, I think it instead goes a long way to root Sully's revelation in empathy rather than, again, white saviorism. It forced him to understand firsthand what the colonialist violence he's a part of feels like on the receiving end. And because the Na'vi are a fictionalized race rather than a real culture, you can tell this story through the eyes of a colonist without it coming at the expense of a real culture's perspective, without serving as historical revisionism, and without using allusions to their real-world suffering to simply motivate the white protagonist. Cameron fully harnesses the power science fiction has to tell these kinds of stories. It's very reminiscent of the way Star Trek uses its alien races to tell allegorical stories of how humanity is better than a relentless pursuit of profit, of how we're better than to eradicate people and destroy their home for our own gain, with the sweeping political opera of Star Wars. Human beings can be better. We are better than that. James Cameron understands that, and Jake Sully's arc across this film is proof that no one is below arriving at that understanding. With that being said, The bad guys in this film work so well because they're all people who haven't gotten there. They've dug their heels in too far and they still see dollar signs at the end of the road. I love Giovanni Ribisi as this colorful, douchey corporate stooge. I love the fact that this is his operation or party or whatever, and yet he still has to answer to someone at the end of the day. And hell, he's really a pushover. He'll back down if Quaritch demands it, even though Quaritch is technically subordinate to him. There's an amazing deleted scene that gives him extra depth right before the big battle, where he declares that Quaritch's campaign has gone completely off the rails. No shit, man. Couldn't have realized that sooner. And then he tries to stop him. Part of me kind of wishes that wasn't cut, as it enriches the villains and shows that they're not all Quaritch. It's a great contrast between the likes of Selfridge versus the Na'vi, and even the scientists. Selfridge answering only to profit, whereas the latter are answering to a higher calling that's beyond the tangible. Selfridge has a deity as powerful to him as Awa is to the Na'vi, the bottom line. But at the end of the day, goddamn, how about Miles Quaritch, ladies and gentlemen? Stephen Lang. God, you are not in Kansas anymore. This guy is committing a performance as one of the all-time great movie villains. On the surface, Quaritch is the classic career military man. He's only experienced the world through conflict, and in turn, every single action or word out of his mouth is one about asserting dominance through violence. It's what informs his entire character. He just sees the world as he's experienced it, and even though he's now literally on a completely different world than the one he left, he still views it the same way because that's all he has ever known, and he is inseparable from battle. He needs a fight. There have been other films made about soldiers who can't live in peace because they fought for so long and so hard that they long for a fight. It's a very real thing that some veterans have to work through after coming home. Quaritch is one of the most fascinating explorations of this idea in cinema, though. There's a fairly nothing scene between him and Jake where the latter mentions that he's about to undergo a ceremony to become one of the Omaticaya and that he'll be able to negotiate with them so as to find a way to let the RDA still get their resources while still keeping the Na'vi happy. You can immediately see in Quaritch's eyes that he feels betrayed by the mere idea of Jake finding a peaceful solution. He doesn't want one. He wants war. He wants the fight. He craves it. I'm convinced Quaritch doesn't directly give a shit about the RDA or the money. He just wants to cause a slaughter and bloody his hands more because it's all he finds meaning in. It makes him a great foil to Jake. He's someone who is violently pro-military, a holder of a position of colossal authority who has never felt like they've done him wrong, whereas Jake is a lowly grunt who has been crapped on and spit on by the army, yet holds a viewpoint that is firmly diplomacy first. I love how Quaritch is actively championing Jake's failure, just getting him to do the bare minimum so that he can have the proof he needs to take control of the mission and just wipe out who he sees as pests. You want to talk about a Vietnam-Iraq war parallel? Whoo, baby! A soldier who's had their morals warped by tunnel vision towards an imaginary objective that needed to be achieved and took out their perceived slights on the indigenous population is fairly on the nose. The next time you watch Avatar, pay particular mind to Quaritch. See how much the movie is saying through him. He's a great villain, and Stephen Lang does tremendous work to bring out all of these inner nuances. I don't know what magic's been done in-universe to bring him back for the sequels, but I'm glad it happened. And really, I don't think this series could have crafted a better bad guy. And I don't usually love James Horner. I know, a bit of a controversial opinion. Like, look, great guy, had some great scores. Love that Titanic score, sometimes. Anyways, his theme for Pandora is gorgeous and in perfect communication with Cameron's voice. It gives texture to the world that James Cameron so gorgeously brought to our screens with revolutionary filmmaking. The simple fact is, Avatar is still the pinnacle of 3D filmmaking. The format has dipped a bit in popularity, and that's largely because so many filmmakers and artists and studios, they just didn't understand how to use the medium. And it's why out of all the films who've utilized that technology, arguably egregiously since Avatar, none have come even remotely close. Seeing it remastered only further widened that gulf. The way that Cameron plays with depth in nearly every frame, creating a photographic diorama that you don't so much watch as fall into, is completely breathtaking. It's the definitive presentation of Avatar. 3D isn't just a take it or leave it component, it's the truest expression of what this film is. It stands in such sharp contrast with the way the format was abused in the years that followed, night and day. It's not only in how detailed and colorful Pandora is, it's that among the whole visual feast of Pandora, there's always a genuine expression of the unique world this film is set in. Each creature is accompanied by little, unique flourishes that make them who they are, and the planet in large feels so much more alive as a result. Remember, the film is about seeing. It's about seeing the little details, the beauty, the ecosystem as it is, and learning to respect that, learning to understand one's place in the cycle of it all. And while Avatar has a reputation as a VFX reel, revisiting it really drove home how much of the film is about more intimate and visceral sights and experiences. The movie actively connects you with the environment. The camera is insanely fluid and dynamic, but it's all in service of that. The stronger the bond with nature, the stronger Jake's bond is with the people. It all starts with a mutual respect and understanding of the ecosystem we're a part of. If we don't respect that, how can we possibly learn to accept and respect one another? That, above all else, is the thing I take away from the story of this magnificent beast of a film we call Avatar. It's just a beautiful film that gets a bad rap because it's cheesy and about as blunt as a message as you can get, but also it's really sincere in its dialogue with a conversation that needed to be had at the time, and yeah, still needs to be had today. If anything, I feel like Avatar has really only gotten more relevant as time's gone on. And I just love the world and beauty of it all, the purity of it. Bad things only happen when you instigate them. You have to learn to adapt and live with the flow of what is. Humans can be selfish, and we know we can be, but when they open their eyes and spend time connecting with the world around them, they can be capable of so much more than selfish desires. We are capable of working towards something greater than ourselves, and James Cameron finally found a vehicle that allows him to combine every single one of his passions. It's kind of a mishmash of all his previous works. The techno-dystopia of Terminator or Aliens, the sweeping melodrama of Titanic, the over-the-top action spectacle of True Lies, the groundbreaking technical craft of The Abyss. It's got everything a James Cameron fan could want, and so much more. And I bet The Way of Water and all the million sequels he's got planned are going to be even more extraordinary on all of those fronts.